They say ghosts are shadows of the dead, echoes trapped in places they once knew. But what if some ghosts aren't tied to buildings or graveyards or cursed objects? What if one follows the rain? Every time the storm rolls in, Clara sees him, the man standing in the rain. He doesn't speak, he doesn't move, but he's always there, watching. And what she thought was coincidence was never coincidence at all. This is a story of forgotten truth, a drowned past, and a man who only appears when the sky begins to cry. The rain had come suddenly that night, thick and heavy like a curtain of cold needles crashing down from the heavens. Clara Jennings stood at the edge of her porch, coffee trembling in her hand, staring out at the downpour. The storm wasn't what unsettled her. It was the figure, just beyond the hedge-lined streetlight, half shrouded in darkness. He stood, still, unmoving, drenched, a man in a long coat and brimmed hat, face obscured by shadow and water, watching her house. She blinked, and he was gone, but the feeling he left behind was not. The next morning, Clara drove to work under skies still bruised from the storm. Puddles lined the streets like small mirrors reflecting gray. But as she parked and walked toward the office, she noticed something odd. Her co-workers were dry, laughing about last night's weather. Yet as she stood there, a single raindrop slid down her cheek. The sound of rainfall began again, but only around her, like a cloud had followed her from home. And in the far corner of the parking lot, the man was there again, leaning against a lamppost, soaking wet, his head slowly turned in her direction. Clara's office was on the 5th floor, with wide glass windows overlooking the city. She tried to convince herself it was her imagination, stress, fatigue, but every time she looked up from her desk, her gaze was drawn to the building across the street. And there he was, on the rooftop, standing in the rain again, a lone figure looking directly at her window. Suddenly, the lights in the office flickered, computers hummed, and for a second, every screen in the room went black, then came back, showing Clara's own reflection. But behind her, just for a blink, stood the man. That evening, Clara returned home, heart pounding with an uneasy rhythm. She left the lights off, thinking it might help her feel hidden, safe. But as she moved through the hallway, she heard the faint sound of dripping. She followed it to the living room. On the ceiling, water stains had bloomed in a perfect circle. A puddle was forming on the floor. Her phone buzzed. A notification. Front door camera detected motion. She tapped the screen and saw him, the man in the rain, standing at her front door, not knocking, not moving, just waiting. She didn't sleep that night. At 3:12 a.m., there was a knock on the door, 3 times. Slow, deliberate. She gripped a kitchen knife and crept toward the sound. She dared to look through the peephole, and nearly collapsed. He wasn't just standing there anymore. He was smiling, not a friendly smile, not even a mad one. It was a stretched, hollow grin, the kind painted on porcelain dolls or carved into pumpkins. And then he lifted his hand and waved. Behind her, the faucet turned on by itself. The next morning, Clara called in sick and searched through old newspaper archives. She needed answers. She found a headline from 1968. Mysterious man found dead in rain, body soaked but no rain reported. The photo was black and white, grainy, but the figure was unmistakable. Same hat, same coat, same empty stare. Beneath the article was a handwritten note tucked in the archive. If he stands in your storm, don't open the door. She hadn't opened it yet, but she had seen him. And now, the rain was starting again. A small, modern bathroom lit by early morning sun. A woman stands at the sink, pale and tense. In the mirror's reflection, rain pours down the walls behind her, and a tall, shadowy man in a soaked coat and wide-brimmed hat stands silently in the doorway, face hidden in darkness. In reality, there is no one behind her. A desaturated urban bus stop under an overcast sky. A young woman sits on a bench, tense, while an elderly man with a worn trench coat and a weathered face stares directly at her, eyes intense. The street is wet with distant puddles. A bus approaches in the background, headlights cutting through a soft mist. A dim library archive room filled with shelves of dusty boxes and microfilm readers. A woman sits hunched over an old newspaper reel, fear spreading across her face. On the film screen, a grainy black and white photo shows a faint silhouette of a man in a wide-brimmed hat standing outside a window in heavy rain, barely visible through the fog glass. A dimly lit living room at night with shadows cast from a nearby lamp. A woman sits cross-legged on the floor with a cell phone held tightly in her hands. The phone screen shows a live security camera feed at the front door, where a soaked man in a coat and hat stands silently in the rain. His face is starting to become clearer, distorted and unnatural. An eerie attic cluttered with old boxes and cobwebs. A single beam of flashlight cuts through the darkness, highlighting a puddle of water on the wooden floor. Damp footprints lead to the far, shadowy corner, where a faint figure crouches, dripping wet, partially obscured. The air looks heavy and cold, as though the storm itself is trapped inside. An overgrown, foggy cemetery at night, with crooked headstones and rain falling all around. A woman stands alone at the center, the ground beneath her dry as if shielded by something unseen. In a puddle at her feet, a reflection shows a smiling, drenched man standing directly behind her. The reflection is vivid, but the space behind her is visibly empty. Clara barely remembered stumbling back home, soaked in sweat and confusion. She didn't recall unlocking the door. She didn't recall falling asleep, but she woke to the sensation of water trickling down her forehead. She sat bolt upright. Her ceiling was dry. Her pillow was dry, but her skin glistened with moisture, and the sheets beneath her were damp and cold, as if she'd been lying in a puddle. And there, across the room, stood the man in the rain. Not outside this time. Inside, in the corner. She blinked. He was gone, but the carpet where he stood was still wet. Clara drove out of town. Far away. She needed distance, space between herself and whatever he was. But as she passed the city limits, the clouds began to gather again. Black, boiling ones. The radio fuzzed over into static, then to a voice, whispering her name. The windshield fogged despite the heat being off. And outside her window, mile after mile, every roadside field was soaked. The rain didn't fall from the sky. It rose from the ground like steam, swallowing the road behind her. She checked into a roadside motel miles from anywhere, walls thin, the smell of mold clinging to the air. She needed rest, answers, solitude. In the bathroom, the mirror fogged as though someone had taken a hot shower. Though she hadn't turned on the water, on the glass, something appeared, not written by a hand, but etched from within. Don't look at him too long. She stared. The words slowly dissolved as water ran down the surface, like tears. Behind her, in the mirror's corner, the shape of the man began to form. She looked away, desperate. Clara visited the local library. She asked the clerk about urban legends, strange disappearances, and old folklore. The clerk handed her a folder without a word. Inside were drawings, charcoal sketches of a man with water dripping from his fingers, standing in alleys by windows and reflections. The drawings spanned decades. Different artists. Same figure. The folder had one page left. A name scribbled in faded ink. Father Silas. Only survivor. She found his address, or what was left of it. She arrived in an abandoned chapel in the woods, half swallowed by vines and rot. The wooden cross was broken, and stained glass windows were blackened by mildew. Inside, it smelled of wet stone and candle wax long extinguished. A single figure knelt at the altar, an elderly priest with pale, sunken eyes. "You're marked now," he said without turning. "He doesn't chase. He waits. And every time you see him, you bring him closer." Clara asked what to do. Don't run. Don't hide. And above all, don't answer when he knocks. Clara stayed in the church that night, surrounded by symbols, holy relics, anything she thought might protect her. But in the silence, she heard it. Knock, knock, not from the front door, from beneath the floorboards. Then again, closer now. Knock, knock. The priest stood, eyes wide with fear. "He found you," he whispered. "He's under now. He's always under." He uses water as doors. Clara backed away. The wood beneath her feet was damp. Then came the final knock. From directly beneath her, the floor cracked. The floor cracked beneath Clara's feet, releasing a burst of cold, brackish water that rushed upward like a geyser. She screamed and stumbled backward as the board splintered and collapsed inward, revealing a dark, flooded space beneath the church. A hand reached up, pale, bloated, soaked in shadow. The priest grabbed Clara and yanked her away just as the water surged higher, swallowing pews and crawling up the stone walls like vines. But it wasn't just water. The man was rising with it. "You need to go," the priest gasped, clutching a wooden cross. "If he comes through here, none of us will leave." Clara didn't argue. She ran. She fled into the night, the forest path behind the chapel barely visible through the thick mist. The ground was soaked, her shoes squelching with every step. The rain didn't fall from above. It seeped up from the roots, turning the trail into a sucking bog. With each splash of her steps, she could hear it, another step behind hers. Heavy, measured. She turned, heart thundering, and saw nothing. Then a single droplet fell onto her shoulder. She looked up. No trees overhead. Only a man's silhouette, impossibly standing on the rain itself, high above, watching her. Clara reached an old bridge, wooden and slick, stretching over a silent black river. She hesitated. Below, the water didn't move. It was like a sheet of onyx glass. She began crossing, the planks creaking beneath her. Halfway across, she saw something bobbing in the water beneath. A hat, then a face. The man stood beneath the bridge, submerged up to his chest, staring up at her without blinking. His soaked clothes swirled around him like drowned seaweed. The rain began again, but it only fell over the bridge. Nowhere else. Beyond the bridge stood a forgotten estate, surrounded by a wrought iron fence. Clara ducked to the bent bars and crept toward the house, an ancient structure with shattered windows and ivy-clad walls. The air smelled of rot and mildew. She pushed open the door. Inside, the wallpaper peeled in long strips, and puddles stained the floor like dark bruises. In the grand hall, a massive painting hung crookedly, a family portrait. Her eyes widened. The man was in it, far in the background, among the trees. Clara's hands trembled. The estate was his, or once was. Lightning cracked outside as Clara descended deeper into the house. She found a locked basement door beneath the staircase. Water seeped out from underneath it in steady pulses, as if the house were breathing. A sudden thunderclap knocked loose a key from a rusted hook. She opened the door. A stone stairway led into darkness. At the bottom, she saw a pool, a still reservoir of dark water surrounded by candles long melted into puddles of wax. Floating in the center was a child's shoe, and standing at the edge, motionless, was the man. He turned slowly. Beyond the bridge stood a forgotten estate, surrounded by a wrought iron fence. Clara ducked to the bent bars and crept toward the house, an ancient structure with shattered windows and ivy-clad walls. The air smelled of rot and mildew. She pushed open the door. Inside, the wallpaper peeled in long strips, and puddles stained the floor like dark bruises. In the grand hall, a massive painting hung crookedly, a family portrait. Her eyes widened. The man was in it, far in the background, among the trees. Clara's hands trembled. The estate was his, or once was. She froze as the man's face finally became clear, not monstrous, not faceless, but sorrowful, hollow. The priest's voice echoed in her memory. "He doesn't chase. He waits." Clara whispered, "What do you want?" The rain intensified. The walls of the basement began to crack. Water poured from every surface, rising fast. The man raised a hand and pointed behind her. She turned. Scrawled into the stone wall behind her, half hidden in mold, was a name. Clara Albright. Underneath it, died in 1998. She backed away. "No, I'm not dead." But the man stepped aside, and in the pool's reflection, she saw herself not as she was now, as a girl, drenched, eyes wide in terror. It wasn't him who died. It was her. The basement cracked open like a wound, pouring water into every corner. The pool in the center widened unnaturally, swallowing the stone as though the earth itself wanted to reclaim what had been buried. Clara backed away from the wall, shaking her head in disbelief. The name, her name, the year. The same year her parents had told her she'd fallen from a dock as a child. But she'd survived. They said she'd survived. The man in the rain didn't move. His reflection rippled in the water, but not his body. In the water, Clara saw the truth playing out like a memory projected from the depths. A little girl in a yellow raincoat running through woods, slipping on wet stone, falling, then a cold silence as she sank. No one came. The room began to shift. The stones morphed around her into something else, wooden planks, rotting and warped. The basement had become the old dock where she had fallen. The air was different now. Colder, wetter, more real. The man stood at the edge, where the dock met the Black Lake. Clara stepped forward, mesmerized. "You were there," she whispered. He nodded once. Suddenly, behind her, whispers swirled like mist, voices, soft and childlike. Why didn't they look for me? Why did no one remember? The whispers weren't coming from a man. They were coming from her. Shapes rose from the water. Children. Dozens of them. Pale, blue-lipped, silent. Each had the look of someone lost, forgotten, victims of water, storms, and misremembered tragedies. They didn't speak, but their eyes pleaded, hollow and bottomless. The man in the rain stood among them, like a shepherd of the forgotten. He didn't take souls. He waited for the ones lost time. He gave them a path back. And now he had waited for Clara, because she had never left. Clara felt the pull. A cold current wrapped around her ankles as the water crept higher. Her breathing grew shallow. The dock faded. She was back in the house again, only now fully submerged in water. The candles flickered underwater, still burning. The man now stood beside her, closer than ever. His hand rose slowly, offering hers a chance, not to escape, but to accept. She reached out, trembling, and as their fingers touched, the surface of the water above shattered like glass, and light poured in. Memories, not just hers, but those of all who had drowned and been forgotten, flooded the room. Clara opened her eyes. She was lying on the edge of the forest, just beyond the chapel ruins. Rain poured steadily, but gently now. Her clothes were dry. The chapel was gone. Only stones remained where it once stood. Across the field, at the edge of the woods, stood the man, no longer in shadow. He looked peaceful, like he had finally let go. Behind him, the children watched, silent, waiting, and one by one, they began to fade into the mist. Clara didn't run. She stood, watching until the last drop of rain struck the earth and the last ghost disappeared. Back home, Clara sat at her kitchen table, staring at an old photograph she had dug up, a picture of her as a child, standing at the edge of a dock. Behind her, faint and almost mist, stood the man in the rain. She smiled. For the first time, she understood. Not all ghosts want revenge. Some simply wait to be remembered. When the rain started again, she opened her door and stepped into it, unafraid. The street was empty, the world quiet, except for the gentle rhythm of the rain, and somewhere far off, the soft sound of children laughing. Some ghosts don't chase you. They wait for you to notice them. The man in the rain was never a warning. He was a memory, standing guard over a truth long forgotten. And even now, when the rain falls and the world blurs, he's still there, waiting, watching, remembering.